Hey, e-commerce marketing podcast listener. Are you looking to increase traffic and sales to your website? You can do this by launching your own affiliate program. Just visit getosi.com and sign up for a free trial today. That's getosi.com. Welcome to the e-commerce marketing podcast. I am your host, Arlen Robinson, and today we have a very special guest, Dave Bayless, who is the co-founder of Human Scale Business, which is a strategy consulting firm that helps founders of growing companies that make original products sold online. HSB uses visual modeling techniques to help founders develop a better understanding of the interactions among their product mix, marketing channels, supply chain, and cash flow so they can make better decisions about their businesses. Welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Thank you, Arlen. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, that sounds great. And, one of the things that we're going to be talking about today, which I don't think has ever been covered on the podcast, is customer success, retention, and value. A lot of emphasis these days has been placed on retaining your current customers and getting the maximum value out of them. And so I know that's what we're going to be talking about, and you are definitely an expert on that. And so before we get into the topic of today, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are today, and a little bit about your background?
Sure. It's been an indirect road. I've been around long enough to have had a variety of experiences. I've played several operational and administration roles in business, but my real strengths are in strategy and analysis. I started out in the buyout finance world, and I think what I got from that was a 30,000-foot view of business as a system of interconnected parts. Somewhat serendipitously, that led to me working in a series of startup companies kind of on the other end of the spectrum. And it was a combination of technology-based businesses as well as consumer products companies. And it was with the latter that I got to really dig into the world of product development. And that gave me a really complementary grounds-up view of how marketing and manufacturing and logistics, for example, interconnect.
Okay.
And I think, that consumer products experience and a long-standing interest in technology, not surprisingly, led me to e-commerce sellers. And I'm also very interested in, smaller companies. I like working with small companies. And one of the things that's emerged in the last, decade, as you well know, is that these very small e-commerce sellers are inherently complex. So the tools and the concepts that used to be the exclusive domain of big companies are now appropriate for small businesses, including concepts like customer lifetime value.
Yes, definitely, for sure. Yeah, you could kind of say that the keys to the kingdom have been provided and are available to everyone now. So you're right. A lot of these things that would before only apply to some of the larger, medium and larger size businesses are applied to every business, and you can really take advantage of that as well. Now, what you're doing day to day at your business, the Human Scale Business, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you guys do on day to day and what are your core areas?
Sure. I think the meat and potatoes is helping people understand how much cash they're going to need to grow their business at a certain rate. So anybody who has sold a tangible product understands that money gets tied up in work in process and finished goods inventory. If you're selling through a wholesale or other indirect channel, you've got accounts receivable. So growth tends to require cash.
Sure.
So we help people figure that out. And we do it using, again, a set of tools that used to be sort of exclusively available to large companies. It's a category of visual modeling tools called system dynamics that makes it easy for people to really visualize how their business works together and what the inherent trade-offs in business look like.
Gotcha. Yeah, those things are definitely something that an e-commerce business definitely needs to know and, at any given time, really. But I think a lot of what you said and a lot of what you guys are doing is can definitely directly be tied to determining the value at any given time can definitely be tied to, their current customers they have on hand. And so the main thing that a business will want to do is figure out, how they can effectively retain their existing customers and then, pump the most that they can out of them. So with the average e-commerce business, what do you think is the most important thing that they can do to try to retain their existing customers?
Well, I'm going to cheat and actually say a couple of things.
Sure.
One is to think about the leverage that's available in extending your customer life before you really sort of jump into things. And secondly, to examine your product mix to make sure that you really have something to offer people over time. So when I think about leverage, I certainly have a bias toward emphasizing customer retention because I think most businesses even today tend to undervalue customer retention relative to new customer acquisition.
True.
In some ways, it's a lot more fun to sell a new relationship. And some of the elements associated with retention are just not as visceral. That said, investing in retention isn't unambiguously a good thing from a financial standpoint. It costs money, and maybe more importantly for an e-commerce seller, it takes time and attention. So like so many things in business, there's this contradiction. Investing in customer success and customer retention can increase your customer lifetime value, but it also costs money and resources, which tends to decrease your net customer lifetime value. So it helps to start off by thinking about kind of where am I today? Before you know how to get to where you want to be, you need to understand where you are. So what's the average duration approximately of your current customer base? And then think about sort of what's the potential life?
Right.
Is there really room for growth? I mean, all customers have a finite life. And depending on what kind of category you're in, it's going to vary widely. For example, if you're a maker and seller of baby products, max a customer life is going to be measured in a few years. People just don't need diapers anymore. If, on the other hand, you're selling fly fishing gear, you might have a customer for decades.
Right.
So depending on where it's important to sort of pause a minute and think about where is there leverage? Is there room to improve, or are you already about at your maximum? And that'll indicate how. The other thing is to think about, again, with my strategic orientation, I think about the product mix. If you've got a durable consumer product, it might be something more like a one and done relationship. Do you really have something in your mix that you can offer to somebody on a recurring basis? When I think about industries or businesses that have adapted over time, the auto industry used to be all about selling cars. Way back when, there were people that bought a new car every year, partly because they were just notoriously poorly built.
Right.
But with time and increased competition, auto dealers have changed their revenue mix and emphasize ongoing recurring services. So they're a lot more attuned to customer retention than they used to be. A little closer to home in terms of e-commerce companies, several months ago, I got as a gift a very nice leather portfolio from a company called Colonel Littleton.
Okay.
And it had branded sort of note paper inside of this portfolio, which at first struck me as something kind of odd. I thought, wow, this is a company that makes really high-end leather goods that typically cost hundreds of dollars. Why are they messing around with paper?
Right.
And it slowly dawned on me that I kind of liked their form, and I would go on their site and order it from time to time. And every time I touched them, they sent me this paper. Of course, they're making no money on the paper.
Right.
But it exposes me to their product on a recurring basis. And I really appreciate the cleverness of that, of how to add an element of recurring need to increase the likelihood that people like me will, one day buy one of their, more expensive products and really make it worth their while.
Yeah, for sure. And I see this model on all types of businesses these days. I mean, if you look at, the major retailers, the Amazons, and just even some of the smaller companies that have a pretty established web presence, the whole subscription model, I mean, in these days can almost be integrated into any product company, because basically what you're saying, and the way most of these subscription models work is, that if let's say you sell a food item, or I'm thinking of let's just say like a protein type bar, those are the type of things where, of course, if somebody purchases it one time, they really like it. And let's just say they are somebody that works out consistently, they're going to keep working out. So if they find something they like, they're going to want to reorder it. And so a lot of businesses that are not only just food companies, but items that are consumable, when somebody finishes or it'll run out or it has a fixed life, they're going to have to do some type of reorder. And so what these subscription models do is you kind of get someone on the hook to do an automatic reorder, where you'll capture their billing information and have them commit to, let's say, do a monthly reorder or a quarterly reorder, however you have it. And so I see a whole lot of that these days. And that's something that, really can really help out as far as retaining those customers and getting them, committed on a long-term, commitment. So yeah, that's, another thing that I would add to that. Now, a lot of the listeners here on the podcast are, various e-commerce businesses providing a variety of different products or services. And, as we know, these days, there are literally millions and millions of tools out there that someone could use with regards to customer retention. Do you know, and could you share any specific tools that can assist a typical e-commerce business with retaining customers?
A category of thought that really appeals to me, and that is automating transactions, but not relationships. Mm-hmm. This challenge of how do we cut through the noise? And, for a small e-commerce seller, a great strength is the personality of the founders and the sense of actually developing a relationship that is just not possible to do with a very large business.
Right.
But so how do we use technology intelligently to actually cultivate that sense of relationship? And I think a company that's doing some interesting work in that area is called Bonjoro.
Okay.
Are you familiar with them?
I am not. Yeah, if you can.
So Bonjoro.
Okay.
They're out of London and Sydney. And what it does is allows you to very easily make personalized videos.
Okay.
For a customer. So imagine it being used to welcome a new customer in a way that is clearly personal, mm-hmm. but it uses technology to automate and streamline all the fiddly bits.
Okay.
So you're not messing around trying to do this, from the ground up in a bespoke fashion.
Right.
It has Zapier integrations. It can tie into your CRM system. So it's a slick tool for trying to cultivate that personal connection in an efficient way.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I hadn't really heard of that, and I was just taking a quick look at their website, and it seems like that's really, and that's what kind of sets a lot of businesses apart, because there's these days when somebody's purchasing something, there's a million and one different avenues that someone can go to purchase the product. Of course, you have the behemoth Amazon, where you're dealing with a lot of different sellers, and then of course Amazon directly, where if you're purchasing, it can be a little impersonal, even though the Amazon sellers can communicate directly with the buyers. It's still a little impersonal. But if somebody's purchasing directly from a smaller seller and they are able to form a connection, like you said, through a customized, personalized video, I would say that definitely can go a long way, whether the video is from maybe the founder or, maybe the head of customer support, something like that, where they kind of immediately know that, wow, this company is really taking that extra step to form a connection. I think that's one of the main things that can help pull in a customer, because, these days what I see is there's not a lot of loyalty. People are really just looking to get the most value for the least amount of money. Everybody is financially conscious these days. Most people are. And if they find a cheaper solution and have a solution or a product that has a better value, they're gonna jump ship. But if you're able to form that connection, I think they'll probably think a little bit. They'll think twice before jumping ship. So I think that's another thing that I think can help with a solution like that. But yeah, that's definitely interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that. I had not heard of that particular product, and I think that's a great resource for our listeners. Now, we talked a little bit about the variety of ways, of course, these different types of businesses and how they're selling. And I know it really varies depending on the product being sold and the service being offered as to, how you determine the overall value. But how does an average e-commerce business these days selling, a particular widget or whatever it is, how do they really determine the lifetime value of a customer? What's the 101 in doing that?
Well, without drilling way down into the geeky weeds, I think that we can say a few things. One is that I would advise e-commerce sellers to spend a little time to make sure that they understand the complete customer lifetime value concept. And I'll come back to that in a moment. A second piece of advice I guess I would share is don't get hung up on the math. There's ways to get value out of the concept without doing a lot of number crunching, at least up front. And along that lines is to think, at least initially, with broad averages. The concept of CLTVs, as you know, can be applied at a fairly abstract level. You can apply it to an entire company or a distribution channel or a product or customer segment, or you can drill all the way down to individual customers or the product level where it's appropriate. You can get really, really narrow. But I would start sort of broad and conceptual and see what you can get out of the framework before you worry about too much about implementing it at a real detailed level. Right. So what do I mean about the complete customer lifetime value concept is that lifetime value in the way that I'm using the term moves beyond cumulative revenue. Understanding how much revenue you're getting out of a particular customer or channel is a great place to start. But what CLTV does is really offer a kind of a comprehensive notion of profitability. So it's much more inclusive than revenue or even gross profit. It looks at the customer acquisition cost, right? Which is that goes up, of course, your net value goes down. It looks at customer contribution, a more comprehensive measure of profit. So not only the cost of goods sold, but also the repurchase rate, the direct marketing costs associated with your existing customers and your direct support costs. We've talked about the expected lifetime of a relationship. Other factors equal, the longer the relationship, the higher the value. Right. But it also takes into consideration the truth that $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. So distant future revenue is discounted to the present. So you take all these things together, you come up with a single number, and it's either less than 0, or greater than 0. Right. And of course, higher the better. But anything north of 0 means that by engaging in the relationship, you're actually adding value. Yeah. Over time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as long as you're not, you're not in the negative, and you're not, they're not. The customer is not costing more than they're worth, then there's a positive there, for sure. So what do you think are, a lot of this may be kind of a term, or I guess a phrase that people hear all the time, but you always hear companies say when they're talking to customers, they say, your success means my success. And, even though it's a little hackneyed when you hear that, it is true. Ultimately, if a customer of a business is successful, ultimately the business is going to be successful. And if they have a lot of customers that are successful, vice versa, because, the more success means they're going to either purchase more of that business's products and use more of their services, sell more people, their network expands, and, it just becomes exponential. But what do you see are some of the ways in which an e-commerce business, and I know this can vary depending on the niche of business, but what are some ways that an e-commerce business can ensure the success of its customers? Well, you're absolutely right. The tactics are going to be context specific depending on your customers, your product mix, your budget. And there are people, I'm sure, that you've interviewed over time that have a lot more domain knowledge in some of the tactics than I do. But I've seen a couple of patterns that I think are worth paying attention. And you touched upon one earlier in our conversation, when you referenced software as a service businesses.
Right.
I think a lot of us can learn from what the SaaS folks do. And I think one of the lessons that I kind of glean from that world is to demonstrate value in context, in use. So show people how your product fits in their life. And I can think of a couple of companies off the top of my head, I think, that do a particularly good job of that in the e-commerce world. One is a business not far from my home called Red Ox. And they make really rugged gear bags. They're, I think, some former paratroopers that make these really, really rugged bags. And they spend a lot of time and effort doing videos of their bags, out in the world in really interesting and demanding environments. Another company that I'm a fan of, based in Atlanta, called WP Standard, again, is a company that makes really nice leather goods and a growing line of apparel. And Ryan Barr, who owns that company, does a particularly good job of using photography with his products and providing people and engaging people in kind of what's coming down the road. So he does these sneak peeks of new products and does a really fine job with his photography. But again, demonstrating that value. I think another general sort of bucket of tactics is kind of what you're doing right now, and that is underwriting the conversation. Being valuable to the people you want to serve with your products,
right,
by engaging people in conversation. So at the end of the day, you become sort of central to that world. You don't have to be the center of it all the time, but you can build an association with a community, with a niche.
Right.
So I think those are two broad areas that I think can be applied in a lot of interesting ways to help actually be valuable to customers and help them be sort of successful in their lives with your product.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because when you said these companies really kind of go out of their way to show, I guess you could say, real world applications of best uses of their particular product. Unfortunately, I don't see a whole lot of that. Like you said, there's some companies that do a good job of it, but I don't see a whole lot of it. There's a lot of e-commerce businesses, a lot of sites I go to where if it's a particular product that I'm not familiar with, sometimes they have a hard time communicating, all right, what is this used for? How is it used? And if that's not done early on, when somebody, upon first entry, or at least through some initial engagement, whether that's through an email newsletter, your mailing list, or what have you, then you're going to lose people, because, people these days, they're so busy. They may know they have a need or think they have a need for your product or service, but if they're not able to easily or quickly see how it can apply to their life, they're just going to move on. Their eyes will glaze over and they'll lose interest. So yeah, I think what you said is very important for sure, because if that's not done, you do have to do a fair amount of hand holding and let people know, okay, these are some things that you can do, and it's not taking the intelligence of your customers for granted, because, everyone has a fair amount of intelligence. You don't necessarily have to, I guess you could say, baby these customers and tell them, okay, you do this with our product. This is step one, this is step two. It's not that. It's like I said, it's the main thing is people these days are just so overwhelmed with so much coming at them. There's so many distractions. We've got the social media. You've got all of these, platforms to purchase products. You've got to really just make it clear and save people time. And I think that's really what it does, is it saves people time and really, becomes really thoughtful about how you think your product or service can apply to them. And I think that's really very key. Now, to kind of wrap things up, we talked a lot about customer retention, which is very key as far as, contributing to the overall lifetime value of a business. What do you think is one customer retention strategies that our listeners can implement today and really just immediately start seeing results, if at all possible?
Well, I think the starting point is to, this afternoon, take a first stab at calculating customer lifetime value, across your company.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does, and every time I've done this with a client, is it helps bring to light, make visible a lot of the assumptions that we're making about our business. Every time we say, for example, that my customer acquisition cost is $200,
mm-hmm.
that has embedded with it lots of assumptions about what you believe your customer lifetime value to be. So looking at your business from that structured approach helps make your assumptions tacit, and then it puts everything back into the realm of choice. It starts to create variables again.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it helps you identify really where the drivers might be. So if that's something, for example, if people in the audience aren't familiar with it, you can send me a blank email at cltv@hsb.online, and I'll send you a couple of resources to get you started, a little white paper and a little Excel calculator.
Okay.
And it's something that you can look at it and spend 15, 20 minutes, just using your best guesses. And what it's likely to do is to either challenge you to think of some new approaches to customer lifetime value, and in some cases it's going to reaffirm what your suspicions and your intuition already are, which is useful information too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I definitely appreciate that, Dave. Yeah, that I know would be a great resource for our listeners, and for those people that aren't need a little bit of help figuring out how to set that up. Yeah, that an Excel spreadsheet would be very helpful. So Dave, well, again, thanks for joining us here today on the e-commerce marketing podcast. One thing I want to mention, because I'm always looking at providing as many resources as possible to our audience. You had mentioned that you guys are going to be developing a series of free videos that feature visual model of customer lifetime value. And you gave me a link that I will include in the show notes. So for everybody listening, you look at the show notes or the transcript on the e-commerce marketing podcast website, you'll be able to get the link to that. So that sounds like a great resource. And I see that you also have a lot of resources on your site as well, which is humanscalebusiness.org. So if any of our listeners out there, want to connect with you and get in touch with you, how do they do it?
You can go to humanscalebusiness.org, and my email address is there, or you can book a time to speak by phone right on the website. Okay,
that sounds awesome. Well, thanks again, Dave. We appreciate you joining us here today on the e-commerce marketing podcast. All your information was a great help, and I know it will be a benefit to our listeners.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the e-commerce marketing podcast. You need to get more feedback and reviews from your customers and improve your customer retention? We have made it easy to do all of this with our advanced customer feedback software. Just visit getosi.com/feedback and sign up for a free trial today. That's getosi.com/feedback.